Hi, and welcome back to part 10, which is the final part of this Blender tutorial series for rigging a motorbike. In the last part, we set up our wheels so that they would correctly rotate when we move our root bone in pose mode. And what we want to do now to finish this off is to set up our controls so that our wheel rotation and our steering is going to automatically work when we follow a path, which is going to be the main way that you're going to want to animate vehicles anyway. So let's start off. We're going to add I'm actually going to make sure that my screencast keys are turned on. Going to add a Bezier curve. I'm just going to scale this up to 0.5. Let's rotate this around. I'm going to grab this point and do selection to cursor, keep offset, so that our the start of our path is at the start and origin point of our bike, and we can just rotate this maybe around like this. Let's make a kind of a bit of an S curve, big S shape, something like that. There we go. So we've got our curve. We're going to increase the resolution because you can see here, especially around these points, that it's pretty low res, and we want to make sure it's perfectly smooth for our bike to be going around. So let's increase this. We're going to take our bike and we're going to shift select our curve, Control P, path constraint. And what this has done is added an object constraint to our bike, and this is what we want. This technique that I'm going to go through will not work as a bone constraint. If you were to just go into pose mode and select our root bone and add a follow path constraint, this will not work, and the issues that we had earlier will still persist. This needs to be set up as an object constraint. So we're going to follow the curve in the -y direction, animate the path, and if we press play, our bike is still braking a little bit, and I wonder why that is. If I turn on our mechanical layer, so look at our tilt target. Oh yeah, that's why. It's because when we set up our tilting in one of the previous parts, we added this transformation constraint to counteract the root rotation, but we accidentally left this in world space. So we need to just change this to local with parent. And now that should work fine. Our bike is following our path, absolutely fine. Perfect. Let's split our window and just get a timeline. And if we look at our curve, you can see under the path animation, we've got a couple of properties here, our frames and our evaluation time. Our frames are how many frames it's going to take to go from the start to the end of our curve. So let's maybe increase this to, I don't know, 1,000, just so it's a little bit slower. That's maybe way too slow. 500. Set it back to the default 250. Yeah, that works. Okay. I'm also just going to add a camera in my scene and just zoom this out and just parent this to our armature, so now we can see perfectly what's going on. So our bike is following our curve, but the wheels are obviously not moving yet. So how can we set this up? Well, if we go back to our drivers, let's reopen our driver editor and look at our wheel. We set this up so that it was our Y location divided by the radius, and all the Y location really was the distance that we've travelled. So we need to figure out what is the distance that we have travelled along this curve. We've obviously got our frames and our evaluation time, but that doesn't tell us the actual location or the distance. There is, however, a very handy add-on that we can install that will give us this exact information. So under add-ons, if we just type in curve tools, and it's this one, this Curve Tools add-on. It comes installed with Blender, but it's not activated or it's not turned on by default. So you need to turn this on and just make sure to set your preferences. And now if we go into edit mode, press N to bring up our properties panel. Under edit, see we've got all these different options. I'm not going to go through exactly what this add-on does, but the main part that we're concerned with is this curve info. And if we just press length, it's now going to give us the exact length of our curve. So let's right click this, copy as new driver. Let's go back to our bike. Let's go into pose mode, select our mechanical wheel, and we're just going to hover over this and paste driver. So that's added our curve length as a driver. We need to change this from averaged value to scripted expression, and we now need a couple of extra inputs. Well, we've got our total curve length, but we want to know what our curve length, the distance we've travelled is on every frame. To do this, we can take the total number of frames. So let's copy this data path. Let's add an input variable. And if we click the little drop down, you'll give us the ID type of all the different types of things we could use as drivers, all the different data blocks within Blender. So it's going to be our curve, and our curve is going to be our Bezier curve. And if I just Control V over this, it's going to input that path duration. Let's call this frames. Go back to our curve, and we'll get the evaluation time, copy data path. Under our mechanical bone, there we go. Add an input variable. Again, it's going to be our curve, Bezier curve, evaluation time. I'm just going to call this eval. So these are the three properties that we need. We want to figure out how far we've travelled on every frame. So we can take our curve length, which is our total length, and we divide it by the number of frames it's going to take. So curve length divided by frames. And if we multiply that then by the evaluation time, so let's just add brackets, multiply it by eval, that gives us, for every frame, the distance that we have travelled. If we add brackets around all of this, we can just then divide it by the radius of our bone, or the radius of our wheel, sorry, which is going to be the Z value. Paste that in. Update dependencies, and now our wheel is going to rotate perfectly along our path for the exact with the exact correct rotation and time. Let's right click on this and copy driver and go to our front wheel, paste the driver. We just need to change the radius, so go into edit mode, Control C over our Z value, delete this and update our radius. And now our wheels are going to perfectly rotate along the path even when we have turned around, because we're now not using our axes at all. We're not looking at the direction, we're just looking at the length of this path. The final thing that we can add to to automate this rig a little bit extra is our steering control. So we're going to add an empty. We're going to parent this to the path as well with path constraint. So if we look at our, there we go, our object constraints, that's going to perfectly follow. We can do follow curve as well, doesn't really matter too much. And then we're just going to slide this offset value down to the point where our steering widget is. So now our empty is going to be at that location. And all we need to do is take our steering widget and add a bone constraint of copy location. to the empty. And now let's turn off our mechanical layer. And now our steering is going to automatically turn with that path. We can add in, I think we turned off our tilt function. So let's maybe turn this tilt strength up to like 0.5. And now we're steering and tilting along our path. And I guess the final thing that we could do is to add our ground back in. Let's go into edit mode and scale this up. Subdivide, maybe give it a bit of extra resolution. Let's turn the strength down a little bit. And then we can turn on our ground sensors because we already set those up way back in the second part of this. And now our bike is going to perfectly follow our ground. Our suspension is automatically working, which we can control from the suspension softness. If I turn this completely off, our suspension is not going to work at all. If I set this to 1, our suspension is going to be a little bit loopy and very, very fluid, which is probably way too strong. So again, let's put this at maybe 0.25. And everything is following and working perfectly. So yeah, that wraps up our bike tutorial series. If you've made it this far and you've made it all the way through, congratulations. We've covered a lot of stuff with this. There's been a lot of bone constraints involved. So especially if you're new to rigging in Blender, I appreciate that this is a lot of information. But yeah, I would love to see some of the things that you guys are creating with this. So yeah, congratulations. If you like these videos, please do give them a big thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to the channel, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next tutorial series. Thanks, bye.